can go ahead and begin because it's noon.
All right.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our Public Speaker Bureau presentation for today. Our very own Master Gardener, Sandra Siebert, is going to speak about It's Alive, which I love that title. Nurturing your soil, the importance of soil health. And so what we're going to do, she will present for about 45 minutes. And then if you would please put your questions into the chat room, I will monitor the chat. And then about 15 minutes before 1 o'clock, then I will start moderating your questions, and Sandra will answer them. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Sandra now.
Can I do my screen share now?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Give me a couple of seconds to get this working the way I want it to.
And oh, I forgot to mention to folks, Sandra has let us know that sometimes her internet connection is a little bit shaky. So everyone have patience. She will be here.
All righty. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Sandra Siebert, and soil, the life in the soil has become a real passion for me. The moment I learned about all of this, started learning about all of this, it was like, yes, soil. Because before that, it was just, oh yeah, you need nitrogen, potassium, and all this stuff. But then I started learning that there's actually living things in the soil, and you can't have really good soil without all of those living things. So, so soil is sand, silt, and clay, but it's also, if you've got good soil, it also has air and water. So it looks like it's mostly air and water. That's a higher percentage than sand, silt, and clay, if you've got good soil. And at least 5% soil organic matter is when you start getting really good soil. And this is, on the left, is an example of soil that's been heavily compacted. It's mostly just sand, silt, and clay, and very little air and water, and very little organic matter. And you can see the difference on the right with soil that has more organic matter and more soil and water. And of course, soil also has roots in the ground, but these are not what we're trying to do with soil health. The soil health will help nurture roots, and the little microorganisms in the soil exchange things with the roots. They come into contact with it. And soil, there's like tons and tons and tons. I mean, literally tons of microorganisms in the soil. And one cubic centimeter of soil, which is smaller than a 6-sided die by quite a bit, contains 1 billion bacteria. And that's just the bacteria. That's not counting any of the other microorganisms. So that handful of soil that was at the beginning, that has trillions and trillions of microorganisms. So some of the microorganisms in the soil are viruses. They aren't sure just what role viruses play yet. There's still a lot of research and a lot of learning to do about what's going on underneath the surface of the soil. But the viruses, they're not all pathogens. Some of them cause disease, but a lot of the microorganisms in our soil, most of them are benign or beneficial, with just a few disease-causing microorganisms. We're used to this idea that these things are germs and they're all bad, but they are not. The soil is just like our guts. There are certain things we need to have in there for a healthy gut. There's also other things. There's actinomycetes, which are sort of a cross between bacteria and fungi. They're little single cell colonies of that create these little threads that go through the soil. We don't know a lot about what they do, but they're probably also part of the decomposing process. And they are responsible for that nice earthy smell you get whenever you turn over some dirt. And they are more likely to be present in, I think it's dry and alkaline soils. So, but one of the things that we know most about is bacteria and what their relationship is. And they make up a very large percentage of the microorganisms in the soil. And next is fungi. But when we talk about fungi, we're not talking about mushrooms, these little mushrooms that you see. We're talking about what is going on, what they are doing under the soil. The types of fungi that are important are called mycorrhizal fungi. They put out all these little tiny mycelium threads that go throughout the soil. And so one of the largest and oldest living organisms on Earth is a fungi, just because they put out so much of that mycelia under the dirt, and you just
Sandra,
don't see them.
Do you have other slides that talk about each of those components in the soil? That you want to move forward on your slides?
No, I do not. No, I do not.
Okay.
I have notes as to when I need.
Okay. We're just wondering. People are just wondering about what, the next slide.
Yeah. Okay. 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 I'll say so. Okay. So a large portion of the biomass in the soil is fungi. And this is what it looks like underneath. This is a, magnified plant root, and the mycorrhizal, these little fungal mycorrhizas. I keep forgetting you can't see what I'm pointing at. These little fungal mycorrhizas go through the soil, and they actually make contact with the roots. There's an mycorrhizal, which actually goes into the cell of the plant root, and there's the ectomycorrhizal, which wrap around the plant root cells. And these are how fungi exchange nutrients with the plants. The mycorrhiza of the fungi extends the root's reach by a considerable amount. You have a gram of soil that can have up to 50 meters of these mycelium and mycorrhizas. And that's a little more than 50 yards for those of you who are not metric. Just 1 gram of soil, that's not very much. That's 1/28th of an ounce. So it extends out, and so the mycelium can collect nutrients and water and then ferry it back to the plants, where the plants exchange carbohydrates that they manufacture through the process of photosynthesis. So this is a symbiotic relationship, a give and take, a barter and exchange that we have with fungi. And bacteria also do the same, but they are also working in conjunction with the mycorrhiza. The bacteria, the bacteria live along the little fungal hyphae. And the bacteria and the fungi and the other little microorganisms will take this plant matter and turn it into compost. But first, you've also got macroorganisms, that is those that are larger than microscopic, like earthworms and those little pill bugs and nematodes and some other things. They break this down into much smaller pieces so that the microorganisms can turn it into this. And I hope you all were judging me on my compost pile structure there. I just throw things in and wait. Okay. So one of the worst things you can do to your soil health for your soil health is to compact the soil. Because when you walk on the soil or put heavy things on the soil, it presses out all the little pores and spaces where water and air can get. And the microorganisms that are good for our soil need air and water as well as food.
Okay.
So
Sandra, we're still seeing your It's Alive slide. Did you have another slide you wanted to show?
Yes, I don't know why it's not showing up. Let me go back there. I've advanced several times.
Ah, that's
okay.
what people were wondering.
Do you see a different slide now?
Yeah, we're seeing your yard now.
Okay. Well, apparently if I put it on the actual slideshow, it won't show up. Okay. So that's my finished compost. That's the one I don't want you to judge me on because I just throw things in there. This is how you get all of those little threads going out from that plant root. That's fungal mycelia. And you can see how much more apparent root mass a plant has with its relationship with fungi. And bacteria live along those little fungal hyphae. So, and this is a magnified photo of the fungal mycorrhiza and its relationship with the plant roots. The little knobby things are plant roots, and the little strings are the mycorrhiza. Some of them, like I said, some of them go into the plant root cells and some of them go just around the cells. And these are the little fungi. And this is the dye that, you know, is bigger than a cubic centimeter of soil, and the pretty carrot roots. So, okay, here we go. So you don't want to compact your soil, so you don't want to walk on the soil. So one of the best things you can do for your vegetable and garden is to create permanent growing areas and permanent pathways. And you want your beds to be wide enough or have a width where you can reach into the center, easily reach into the center of the bed without stepping into it from either side. My beds are not all uniform in width because I did this with a wheelbarrow and shovel and was doing trial and error. But what I've recognized is what I see as the best width for a growing area is 4 feet, because I can easily reach into the center from either side, and it gives me plenty of space to plant. I can get at least 3 rows of vegetables that are not like huge, like cabbages and stuff, in a 4-foot wide bed. Also, you want to avoid using a rotary tiller. I never use a rotary tiller, but you want to minimize that use, because if you frequently use your rotary tiller at the depth of the tines, you will create a hard pan where water and air cannot, and plant roots and soil microorganisms cannot penetrate. So you want, if you feel like you must use a tiller, use it very infrequently. Some people like to use tillers because it infuses air into the soil and apparently gives a boost to your plant growth. But one market gardener who presented at this soil regeneration summit that I watched, he said that it's adding air to the soil like that is like blowing on a fire. Yeah, you get more flame, but you also burn up your fuel much more rapidly. So you want to not do that. And tillers also tear up the fungal mycelium, expose these microorganisms to the elements, which damages them significantly. And so after you've done that, it takes them time to rebuild. One thing you can do in lieu of tillage is these broad forks. This is what I use when I want to break up, loosen the soil, or infuse air into the soil, or get things worked into the soil a little better. You just, it's 18 inches wide with tines that are about 12 inches long, and you just stick it straight in. You wiggle it a little bit and pull it straight out, and you do that multiple times. And I usually do this after I've added my compost or any other amendment that I want to use. And that falls down into those holes a little bit. And then I rake it shallowly to cover up the holes. And then, you know, it helps a lot. And this is the broad fork out of the soil. So this is what happens when you have heavily compacted soil without soil life. You've got water does not flow through, it does not drain away, and you have waterlogged soils. And that's when you get lots of disease, because according to Dr. Elaine Ingham, most pathogenic bacteria are anaerobic. That means they do not need oxygen to live, whereas beneficial ones are aerobic. They need oxygen. And all of these little microorganisms will also create spaces and tunnels for water and airflow. So you need to keep them alive. And my big rule for soil health is no bare soil, ever. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but you do not want to leave the soil bare for long periods of time, because that damages all the microorganisms that are in the soil. It also oxidizes nutrients and contributes to carbon dioxide in the soil, in the air. You can take the easy route and just keep your soil covered with a good organic mulch. I like hay. Preferably you would leave it sit for a little while so that any seeds that are in there will germinate and die. That hay also, as it decomposes, it feeds the soil microorganisms a little bit, and you always want to have food for your soil microorganisms. This is a combination of me having mulch and cover crops on my bed, and you even want to feed your soil microorganisms when it looks like this, because even though they are metabolizing far more slowly at this time, you still need to keep them up, still need to feed them and keep them alive. So this is another look at what's a compacted soil and what you need in the soil. What's good soil. You need to have the better thing, other than just covering it with mulch, is to always have roots in the soil. This good, really rich, dark earth on the right, it has roots in it. And when you have roots in the soil, they nurture the soil life much better than just having a cover. Because when you look at this rhizosphere, which is where most of the fungi and bacteria live, most of that microscopic activity is going on right around the roots, because the plants excrete things that talk to the bacteria and the fungi, and then the metabolites, the nutrients that the fungi and bacteria have to exchange to go in there. So if you keep roots in the ground, you will have a much more diverse and healthy soil life. And every plant has roots. This is one of my favorite cover crops. This is crimson clover. It can be planted in the spring or in the fall. If you plant it in the fall, it will give you a winter cover. It survives the winter and then it comes back in the spring. And it is a legume, as all clovers are, which they say legumes fix nitrogen in the soil, but it's not really the plant, it's the bacteria that favor living with the legumes that take the nitrogen that's found in the air and turn it into a form that plants can use. if you have really good, proper soil health, you shouldn't really ever have to add much in the way of amendments at all. If you feed it compost and keep the soil covered, you can even, and this is oats, grassy plants can be cover crops too. Oats are really easy. You can plant oats several times during the season and cut it down, and it'll come back, and it gives you it gives you good biomass. And sometimes planting grassy cover crops for a season in between can disrupt some disease cycles. You can also plant cover crops in and among some of your larger vegetables. This is buckwheat. The little pale green is buckwheat seedlings in among parsnips and celery. Plant it among your tomatoes, among your peppers, among your eggplants, and you will have much better infiltration of roots in the soil and a much happier soil. And yes, weeds can also be cover crops. This is a stand of kale that had come through the winter one year, and I'd already cut the henbit down, but it was growing in a sea of henbit. So yeah, you can use weeds, but you have to cut them down before they get reproductive on you. And this is just an intensive planting of lettuces and some other leafy greens. If you plant your crops close together so that their leaves spread out and cover the soil, you can use a lot less hay. And hay mulch will also help keep moisture in the soil and protect and keep the soil cooler in the hot sunlight. Another thing that causes compaction is rainfall. So when you have cover crops and or mulch over the soil, it slows the rain, it slows the water down so it doesn't compact your soil. And this is what happens when you have bare soil. You have carbon in the soil that gets released into the atmosphere. If you have a good plant cover, any carbon dioxide that is released into the atmosphere gets used by the plants. And so they put that carbon back down into the soil, and carbon is sequestered, that is stored in the soil largely by those fungi that are living in the soil. So the one on the right is what you do not want to have, because that contributes to climate change because it increases carbon dioxide in the air. And this is a quote that I thought was good to include. The soil is a living system. Its food is carbon that is mostly delivered via the plant's roots through the process of photosynthesis. Remove the plants and the soil dies. Dead soil means no water absorption and no retention. No water means the plants can't keep photosynthesizing and the system is degenerating. And what we want to do, and this is another example of what you don't want versus what is bad. And when people keep talking about sustainability, but what we want to be looking at is regeneration of the soil, because you don't want to sustain that thing that is on the left. You want to regenerate it so it looks like that on the right. Bare soil also disrupts the water cycle, which is a great, huge topic by itself. But when you have the soil covered, not only does it cool things down, it also contributes to cloud formation and thus improves precipitation. So, and your little 10 by 10 gardens are not going to contribute much to the water cycle, but if we get all those little 10 by 10 gardens doing proper soil health management, maybe we can convince the bigger agricultural concerns to implement those same principles, because this works on a large scale as well as a small scale. And if you have healthy soil life that's breaking down all of those nutrients so that the plants can take them up, you have more nutritious food. Everything will have more vitamins and minerals and enzymes than if your soil microorganisms are not alive. And here's it, permaculture, and this is, I'm not close to this really at all myself, but this is a good thing to start working toward, is permaculture, is to have the ground permanently covered with vegetation. And one of the permaculture practices is to incorporate annual and perennial plants together into what they call food forests. And so on the right is an example of a food forest, and on the left is a very poorly managed annual cropping field. And this is actually a local, I don't know if it looks like that now because this was taken several years ago, but this is an example of a local miniature little food forest, permaculture. Behind all of this green vegetation in there is also an annual vegetable bed. But this little area will produce a lot of food. And this is part of my attempt at permaculture practices. This is a little apple tree at the edge of my vegetable garden. I also have some elderberries and blackberries and red raspberries along the edge. And so this is what we want to strive for. I've never seen a nitrogen deficient plant in a natural ecosystem. Obviously, there's something we're doing in agriculture that's interfering with the biological fixation of nitrogen. So this is our goal. This is our goal, to have our soil life so healthy that we don't need to keep adding a whole bunch of expensive and often damaging amendments to our soil. Synthetic fertilizers, it can damage the soil life, and you have to just keep adding more and more and more to get things to keep growing. Where if you have a really healthy concentration of soil life, you don't have to add as much to the soil to get healthy plants. They are not just more nutrient rich, they are more resistant to disease, more resistant to pests, and more resistant to damage from weird weather fluctuations. Another thing to help with soil life is to have diversity of plant life in your garden. This is a flower and herb garden, but you can do the same type of thing with a vegetable garden. Plant several different types of vegetables together in the same bed. And there's a whole nother topic of companion planting. What's best to plant with everything? But you can get a whole lot more food, healthier soil life if you use a diversity of plants in your soil, crop rotation, and just planting things together. It diversifies the microscopic life in your soil, and so you get a lot healthier plants. And this is an example of what happened in my garden one year. I had a little space between the peppers and eggplants that didn't get planted. So I planted marigolds there, which are good for controlling damaging nematodes. And then there was this amaranth that you plant it once, and if you let it go to seed, it goes everywhere anyway, but it's beautiful, so I let some of it grow. And so I had this beautiful, diverse little thing. I had peppers and eggplants and marigolds and amaranth. And so this is the kind of thing that can happen when you diversify your plantings. And of course, crop diversity also encourages all those bugs that we like to have around, the butterflies. But of course, you have to let caterpillars eat something in order to have the butterflies. But all kinds of things are encouraged by having healthy soil and a good diversity of plants. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is that most plants, with a few exceptions, are dependent on that relationship with fungi. And your vegetable gardens and grasslands they do best when you have a balanced mix of bacteria and fungi with just a little bit of a leaning toward fungal growth. And so anytime you disturb the soil, whether you're double digging or tilling or whatever, you destroy that, you tear that up. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. Of course, you have to dig your potatoes and that kind of thing, but avoid digging as much as possible. You also, pulling weeds and pulling out your annual vegetables also disturbs the soil. So when you can, instead of pulling things out by their roots, cut them off at the soil level. Now, some weeds won't go away unless you pull them out, but you can pick and choose what that is. And for my annual vegetables, for most of them, unless they're really shallow rooted ones, I just cut them off at the soil level in the fall when I'm cleaning up. My tomatoes, I mean, I can tear up, those roots go out for a very long ways, and so I can tear up a lot of soil if I pull out my tomato plants. So I just cut them off at the soil level, and the roots will decompose and feed all of those little microorganisms that are in the soil, and so make them very happy because they're not being brought out into the light and they're being fed. And there are different ways of weed control so that you don't have, I spend a lot of time weeding. I just haven't gotten to the place where I don't spend a lot of time weeding because I have a very large area that's a little difficult for me to manage that way, but I'm working toward that. You can smother out weeds with very dense plantings of the things that you want, with cover crops, with thick layers of your organic mulch. And there's one, a market gardener talked about controlling weeds through occultation. When he has a completely bare bed, he puts a black plastic tarp over the bare soil and leaves it there for 2 weeks. And what happens is the weed seeds in the soil, the black tarp warms the soil just enough that it encourages all those weed seeds to sprout. And then because you're leaving the tarp on for a whole week or two, or for 2 weeks or 3, they die out because they don't have any light. And it's a lot easier to do this on a small scale than on a large scale with the way he was doing. He had these giant tarps. But you can go to one of your farm stores and get one of those plastic tarps that it's silver on one side and black on the other. And you can lay that out and use that over and over and over again. Just pick the size that works for your garden. And if you store it properly, you should be able to use that for years and years and years. So I can't believe it. I think I got through what I really felt like I needed to cover with you right now. So, I was going to also offer you some resources. Some of the places that offered these online webinar series, or places that were part of these series. Kiss the Ground was one of the first ones that I discovered, just kisstheground.com. They offer, a lot of these places offer paid courses that you can do, but they also provide some free information. And if you sign up to get emails from them, they'll often send you information about, free online things, webinars and stuff that they are offering. Kiss the Ground is provided some of the slides some of these are my photos and some of these are slides from Kiss the Ground. The more technical ones are from Kiss the Ground. Soil Food Web, this is an organization that offered the Soil Regeneration Summit that I participated in this winter. And there's a lot, they also offer like really detailed coursework on soil regeneration, how you can become a professional in this. But they also provide a lot of free info, little videos and stuff. And Kiss the Ground, there's a movie, they have a movie on Netflix called Kiss the Ground, which I have not yet watched because I can't make myself sit down for 2 hours to watch a movie. But it's on Netflix and it's narrated by Woody Harrelson, and it will give you a really good overview of regenerative agriculture practices. TheMarketGardener.com, he was one of the presenters at the Soil Regeneration, and he's doing large-scale market gardening, but there he will probably have some things on there that you can translate into a smaller thing. Bionutrient Food Association, that is bionutrient.org. They can give you information on how the soil life makes your food more nutritious. TheGrowNetwork.com, I get emails from them. They offer paid coursework as well a lot of free videos. If you like them on Facebook, you get lots of stuff that you can check out. Permaculturestudent.com is another resource if you're more interested in permaculture. And this is one of mine that I think most people will get a lot more out of because it offers a lot of more practical stuff that you could do. And I'm not sure if he offers paid coursework or if all of his stuff is free, but that's thesurvivalgardener.com. And it is hosted by a man who calls himself Dave the Good. And he's also on YouTube. I've seen a few of his videos. He gardens in Florida, but you can translate a lot of his stuff into Kansas. The last video I saw of him was making fermented plant juice to feed your plants with. And he's not only has, these are short videos, he's not only got a lot of information and things that you can do, but he's kind of entertaining to watch too. So those are the ones that I'm recommending at this point, and there's tons of others. I get emails from a lot of other associations that are encouraging people to grow their own food and telling them about how to do that better. And that's what I've got without having to go through my notes and go, what did I forget?
Well, thank you so very much, Sandra. Boy, did I learn a lot, and I thought I knew something about soil. I was particularly struck by the whole idea. I mean, of course, our soil is alive, but to understand that you really need to cover your soil with plants to keep the roots, you know, collaborating with the fungi, the bacteria, etc., to keep it alive. And that bare soil is awful, you know. I hadn't, so I'd want to thank you for allowing me to crowd my plants together in my bed, because I've been criticized for that I don't leave space, you know, between all of my plants. And I think, well, because I want one of everything, and I crowd them together. So now thank you for helping me feel better about crowding my plants together.
You do need certain amount of spacing, but a lot of times the recommended spacing is far too generous than necessary.
Well, I'm talking about a regular perennial bed, you know. I mean, I have a stepping stone, so I keep stepping on, I try to step on that same stone, so I'm not stepping between plants, because as you say, compacting the soil can be really damaging, you know, if you're stepping in between things. And the second point that I thought was, again, so fascinating, again, is the idea of, yes, I have to dig out dandelions root and all, okay, because nothing will stop a dandelion.
Yeah.
But the idea of cutting your tomato plants at the base and leaving those roots is brilliant. I mean, I hadn't even thought that those roots can then go back and regenerate the soil again.
And might I suggest that you not necessarily feel compelled to dig out every single dandelion, because dandelions can contribute to your soil health. They make tunnels that earthworms and stuff go through with their deep roots. Their deep roots pull nutrients from deeper levels. And then when the leaves die, they leave those nutrients in the soil to feed the microorganisms and to eventually feed your plants. So you don't need to be real. I'm still trying to get myself into the, I don't have to pull out every single weed.
Well, but you also live in the country, and I'm living in the city, surrounded by other people's dandelions. So other people are leaving their dandelions, okay, and taking care of their soil. In my little yard, I want to keep those dandelion seeds out of my garden beds, okay? So
and the more covered your soil is, one of the recommendations for controlling dandelions in your lawn is to have a nice, thick, healthy stand of grass, because the seeds need light to germinate. And so if they can't get light, they're not going to germinate. Exactly. They might stay viable in the soil for several decades until they get that little piece of light they need, but they won't germinate as long as they can't get that light. I
want to encourage folks to please post any questions or comments you have in the chat. For example, Sharon has talked, mentions she's trying out pussy toes as a green mulch. Have you had experience with that? Can you speak to pussy toes?
The only thing I know about them is that they're growing rampantly out here under my cedar trees and out in some areas of the yard where we've got not really thick grass. So I don't know how thickly they would grow in like a garden type of conditions, because I haven't tried. That's something I can try, because I just love them. I think they're adorable.
Yeah, right. I'm curious about the whole rototiller controversy, because I know my dad raised me as an organic gardener, and he purchased my first and only rototiller. And so I used to do, what's it called? Is it double digging, where you dig a trench, put in all your compost and leaves and whatnot, and then cover that and then do the next row. And then the following spring, I would rototill it, you know, but then learn, well, of course I ran out of sun, so I couldn't do veggie gardening and gave the rototiller away. But so when did that shift? When did the science community recognize that rototillers were actually not a good thing for soil health?
I can't really tell you. I know that for at least a decade and probably more, I've recognized that that's not what my husband's grandfather used to turn the soil over every fall and leave it exposed so it would get the freeze and thaw and be really nice and fluffy in the spring. Well, I learned that you don't want really nice fluffy soil, because that means it's dead, because the fungi and the bacteria create soil structure and hold it together. And so you don't want it to be real fluffy. You want it to have that structure. And so it's better to keep it covered with something in the fall and not tear up all those fungi that have been building up all summer, and keep it alive. I don't know when it's changed, and I'm not sure that the conventional horticulture, agriculture, that they're actually fully there yet, but places like Kiss the Ground are trying to educate agriculturists and horticulturists on this fact that we need to keep that soil alive.
Right.
And if you don't have to till, that's less work.
Exactly. Well, or dig, exactly. So what are your top choices for organic mulch for perennial flower beds?
My perennial flower beds is just chipped wood mulch. And we just get the stuff that the road and bridge chips up here in our county. And so it's cheap, and you know, all we have to do is go and have them loaded up for us, and it's really cheap. So that's what we use. It's probably not the best, but it's what I use. It's what we can get on in large quantities without spending a fortune.
Okay. Another question, and would help to clarify the relationship between the role that cover crops play in relation to the water cycle, or does adding adding cover crop actually add to the rainfall? I was kind of confused about that cycle.
Well, yeah, when your soil is perpetually covered with plants, whether it's on a small scale, and of course, like I said, the little gardens don't have that much impact on the water cycle, but it's about getting more and more people to understand this. When you have your soil covered with plants, for one thing, it cools the soil. The plants transpire, they release moisture that contributes to cloud formation, and then it falls. And a good portion of that rainfall is impacted by the regional, your area's ground cover. So yeah, that's what it is. I don't have a really good detailed understanding of the water cycle, but that's it. Basically, the plants cool things down. They transpire, moisture, clouds form, rain falls, the plants take it up, and the cycle just keeps going. Okay. And there's a whole lot of other cool things about the water cycle that I started to learn about, but like I said, that's a whole topic by itself.
Sure, yeah, because it seems to me that I mean, well, obviously, you know, there've been times when I've wanted to do a rain dance, right? When you want it to rain. But my understanding is there's really nothing we can do to stop droughts. I mean, short of covering the entire state of Kansas, for example, Western Kansas, with crops and not leaving the fields to fallow.
Yeah, and proper management of animals too also helps get, you know, all of those confined animal feeding operations that have bare soil, that's dead soil, even though there's animals pooping on it all the time. It's compacted and it's exposed. Because if you properly manage your animals with rotational grazing, they actually regenerate the soil and make healthier grasslands, and that's a healthier environment. Because animals, large herds of animals, have always been part of the ecology in Kansas, in the US. I mean, millions of buffalo, but they move, they keep moving. They poop and they pee, and that feeds the microorganisms in the soil, and their hooves make indentations that catch seed and water. And so they actually improve the soil rather than degenerating it if they are properly managed.
So I think we've got some people excited about pussy toes. Do you start them from seed, or if you get plants, where do you get your plants from?
Me? Mine were here. I didn't do anything. If Sharon is growing them, she would probably be able to speak to that.
Right. Sharon said she ordered hers from the Missouri Wildflower Nursery and got some extras from the Native Medicinal Garden, you know, when they were renovating. So yeah, because you know, when I see a treasured native plant growing in a prairie or whatever, I have to stop myself from stealing it, you know, because I know that's called poaching, and thou shalt not do it. So you know, it's better to purchase or, you know, buy your native plants from other places. We have another. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I got a couple of things from my parents' cattle pastures. Some of the the native echinacea and some of the native artemisias. I got from their passion. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Here's a question. If planting too close together and weed pressure provide competition for nutrients, then why does planting so tightly work in other situations?
That's a good question that I'll have to think about. If some of it depends on the plants, you have to give your plants space to reach their full maximum size. Like I don't plant my cabbage plants, I space 18 inches apart because eventually those leaves are going to completely cover the bed area, and too close a planting like that could aggravate disease conditions. If you need to have airflow, it's really a matter of what plants you're planting closer together. And if you have really good soil health, if you're adding compost in every year and raking it in very shallowly, then you should have enough nutrition in the soil for all of your plants if you got a really good, healthy soil. I've read about intensive planting, they say you may need to add more nutrients or water to that, but I don't hardly add anything but compost or some other type of homemade fertilizer. So
I wonder if it would also depend on the length of the roots too.
It would, yes. One of the things is the root zone. If you have shallow rooted plants and deep rooted plants, it works better. So.
Right, okay. We have a hand raised. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Oh, this is just Sharon. I just wanted to add something to Sandra's point about planting closer together. I'm wondering if also when you're gardening in town and your beds are amended, if you're planting native plants, they don't need it that much nutrition. So I'm wondering if that helps, or you can plant those closer together. Whereas when you're doing vegetables, I mean, they're annuals for the most part, and they're sucking up all those nutrients. So they need that space and nutrients. Where your perennial natives, not so much.
Right. And sometimes it depends on the vegetable that you're growing too.
Other questions or comments from our participants? So I heard you say, Sandra, that it's okay for me to just let my oak leaves drop and leave them on the ground.
Yeah, unless they're so thick, they're gonna smother out your grass.
Yes,
you know.
Yeah, it's not the grass, it's the plants themselves that I worry about, smothering too much. So sometimes I do try to lift extra oak leaves just because the oak leaves are thicker and they take so much longer.
They do down. And one thing you can do, I used to have a leaf blower, but you could reverse it so that it vacuumed in mulch. I had this beautiful maple tree next to my last house, and that's what I would do every fall is I would just suck up all of the leaves, and it would chop them up, and it took up a third of the area. I would run out of leaves before I mulched everything that I wanted to.
Yeah.
Although I keep seeing a lot of posts about leaving those in place because it also provides winter cover for various native insect species that like ladybugs and other insect species that we need to keep around. And people might think that the fact that we don't have as many insects as we used to is a good thing, but it's not. It's not really. We're just perpetuating an awful cycle.
Yeah, my vacuum mulcher is my favorite tool. So, and again, it's primarily those oak leaves that I worry about, but I can't even vacuum those until, February, March, because they stay on the trees so long. But I do collect my leaves and put the bags in the garage, so they're, you know, so then I, like you say, then I have free mulch for spring.
You can put them in compost,
exactly. And we have a question here about compost. Is compost without any manure mixed in still compost, or is it basically just organic matter at that point?
Oh yeah, compost is rotted organic matter. That's what it is. Whether it's all plant matter, whether it's just all plant matter or whether it has manure in it, it's compost.
Okay. I used to collect some horse manure from a friend of mine. You know, the decomposed. It had been sitting for a while, but came with dung beetles. So do dung beetles hurt anything in the soil, or do they live above the soil, or what's?
What dung beetles do, dung beetles are part of that decomposition process. From what I understand, I don't have a real extensive knowledge of entomology, but from what I understand, dung beetles are actually a good part because they help decompose. What they do is they lay their eggs in these little balls of manure. And you know, that's just part of the decomposition process. I would recommend doing a online search for dung beetles in Kansas to get a better idea of the role that they play. But that's my very limited understanding.
Right. Aman was also wondering if compost without manure had near the positive effect as compost with manure involved. I mean, are there obviously different qualities of manure? What's the best quality of manure, or of compost, I should say, if there is such a thing?
Compost. I am not a compost expert. I mean, you saw my compost heap. That's what I do. I turn it over a couple times a year, rebuild it. But I just, whatever. One thing I do is I grow comfrey and stinging nettles. Although I have trouble having enough stinging nettles to put in the compost heap because we eat them. But they have a nutrient content comparable to manure. You don't have to have animal manure to have a really good, rich compost.
Sure.
You just need to have good, rich plant matter.
Right, and to mix in the green with the brown and the, manure occasionally or what have you. I mean, it's food scraps. I cannot throw away a banana peel.
Yeah.
All the coffee grounds, including the brown paper filter, goes in the compost. Lots and lots. So compost is like you say, probably a whole other conversation we could have.
Yeah. And there are people, would have things to add to a compost discussion, but there are people who are a lot more better versed in the proper way to do compost because I'm not doing it.
Right, you make a
right.
Yeah,
but it's working.
Right. As Sharon says, the source of organic matter can affect the nutrient content of the compost and the pH, but the greatest benefit is to the soil structure.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. Okay, so I think we're just about out of time unless anyone has any final questions or comments. This has been really informative, Sandra. I can't thank you enough because, as you said, we often forget exactly how important soil is, and that we need to keep the soil as healthy, if not more healthy, in order for our plants to be as healthy as possible. So I really greatly appreciate your presentation and all the wonderful points you made and everything. And everyone is giving you lots of kudos and lots of thank yous. So with that, I thank you, Sandra, and I thank everyone for coming. And again, this presentation has been recorded and will be available on our Douglas County Master Gardener website. So you can spread it around, share it with other folks, and share Sandra's knowledge with more people and keep your soil extra healthy. So with that, thank you so very much, Sandra,
thank you,
Sharon, and everyone here. Have a good day, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.